Welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be tackling faith. But not just faith in general. We're going to kind of flip it on its head a bit and look at faith.
Yeah.
When things get really, really wild.
Yeah, when logic goes out the window.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to be using the Christmas story as our lens here, and specifically Mary's experience as a jumping off point.
Yeah. We've got a devotional on the Christmas story,
Yep.
and then also the book of Luke chapter 1.
Okay, great. And, we always hear about Mary's faith, but I think sometimes it's easy for us to kind of gloss over just how insane her situation actually was.
Absolutely.
And the devotional really brings that to life. Imagine, God has been silent for 400 years, no prophets, no miracles.
Right.
People are basically hanging on by a thread.
Yeah, they're desperate at this point.
Desperate for a sign. Any sign.
Yeah. And then boom, angel appears to this young unmarried woman in a culture where, let's be honest, that's basically social suicide.
Right.
I mean, the devotional doesn't sugarcoat it at all. She could have been ostracized, maybe even worse.
Yeah. It's really heavy stuff when you think about it. And yet her response to the angel Gabriel is, I am the Lord's servant. I mean, it's easy to read that and think, oh, how faithful. But, what must have been going through her mind?
Right. I mean, that's the question, isn't it? Because blind obedience is one thing. But what the devotional really emphasizes is that this was a conscious choice. What we see in Mary isn't this absence of fear, but the courage to have faith despite it.
That's powerful. I think that's where it gets really interesting for us. Because, haven't we all had those moments
Right.
where something feels impossible, terrifying even, but there's this tiny voice urging us to trust, to take that leap?
Totally. And the devotional makes this great point, too, about how God works. Because he doesn't always choose the obvious or the powerful or the already successful. It's often in the seemingly insignificant and the overlooked that we see his power most clearly.
Totally. It challenges all of our assumptions about how this should work.
Right.
We think if God's going to do something big,
Yeah.
surely he'd pick someone well bigger.
Yeah.
But Mary's story just flips that on its head.
It does. And it reminds us that faith isn't about having this perfect plan or guarantee. And in fact, the devotional even kind of hints at the fact that Mary probably didn't even understand the full picture, just like we often don't.
Right.
But her faith was rooted in something deeper.
Well, and there's that verse in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope in a future. And that seems pretty relevant here.
Yeah, it's like the bedrock, isn't it?
Yeah.
Even when the situation is insane, even when logic is screaming, run! That promise is still there. And it's almost as if Mary's faith is this living, breathing example of what that verse looks like in action.
Yeah, that's so good. So it makes you wonder, what if we looked at our own impossible situations through that lens? What if instead of getting bogged down in the how, we focused on that deeper trust?
Right, that's where it gets exciting. Because the devotional suggests that this kind of faith isn't passive. It's not just about accepting what's thrown at you. It's about actively choosing to participate in what God's doing, even when it's terrifying.
Okay, so we're talking about actively participating in a plan we might not fully understand, in a situation that feels impossible. That's a lot to unpack. Where do we even begin to wrap our heads around that?
Well, that's where Mary's story gets even more fascinating. Because if we look closely at the text, we see that her faith wasn't just the sudden burst of superhuman strength, it was a journey. And the devotional highlights these moments where that journey really comes to life.
Okay, so we're not just talking about a single yes moment, but a series of choices, a way of navigating the unknown. That makes it feel a little more relatable, do you think?
Absolutely. Because it shows us that faith isn't about perfection. It's about showing up even when you're scared and trusting that God will meet you there.
So how does Mary actually do that? How does she walk this journey of faith? What specific moments does the devotional point to? They give us a glimpse into her process, her struggle even. Because, it's got to be more complicated than just saying yes to an angel, right?
Well, one thing the devotional brings up is Mary's song, the Magnificat. The one she sings after Elizabeth, her cousin, basically confirms everything the angel said.
Oh, right. The My Soul Magnifies the Lord one. Yeah. I've always loved that song. But I never really thought about it in the context of a faith journey. It always felt more like a celebration.
And it is. But the devotional points out that this celebration is born out of deep personal struggle. It's not just, yay, God chose me. It's Mary acknowledging this huge societal shift that's about to happen because of her.
Yeah, because she's basically turning the social order upside down. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, in those days, a young, unmarried, pregnant woman was pretty much at the bottom of the ladder. And now she's carrying the Son of God. That's got to shake things up a bit.
Exactly. And the Magnificat is her saying, I see what you're doing, God, even if the rest of the world doesn't. She's recognizing that God's power is shown in lifting up the humble, the overlooked, the ones that society tends to dismiss.
Okay, so we're seeing this real depth to her faith. It's not just blind trust. It's this active understanding of God's bigger plan, even when it means she's going to be right in the middle of the storm.
Right. And, the devotional also points to her journey to Bethlehem. Think about it. She's pregnant, probably pretty close to giving birth, and has to travel this long distance. I mean, in those days,
Oh, yeah.
that's not a comfortable trip.
No kidding. And to do that, knowing the social stigma she's facing, knowing she doesn't even have a comfortable place to stay when they arrive, that takes some serious guts.
It's resilience in action. And, it reminds us that faith isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about trusting God through it. Because even when the circumstances are less than ideal, God is still working.
It's funny, because we often picture Mary as this serene figure. But the devotional paints a much more gritty, realistic portrait. She's facing real-world problems just like we do.
Yeah.
But she's choosing to let her faith guide her actions.
Yeah, it humanizes her, right?
Yeah.
And the devotional really drives home the point that faith isn't about being superhuman. It's about choosing to trust, to move forward, even when you don't have all the answers.
So for those of us listening who might be in the middle of our own Bethlehem journey, so to speak, what practical advice does the devotional offer? Because, it's one thing to admire Mary's faith, but how do we actually live it out in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the devotional actually gives us a few concrete things to consider. First, it talks about prayer, and not just as a way to ask for things, but as a way to really connect with God, to listen for his guidance.
Yeah, because let's be real. It's kind of hard to trust someone you don't talk to, right? Prayer is like building that relationship so that when the hard stuff comes, you've got that foundation to stand on.
Yeah, exactly. And the devotional also emphasizes the importance of really digging into the Bible, not just reading it passively, but wrestling with it, letting it challenge your assumptions.
So it's about getting to know God's character, understanding his heart, not just his promises. Because honestly, sometimes those promises feel pretty far off when you're stuck in a tough situation.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating because the devotional also talks about community, about finding other people who are walking this journey of faith alongside you.
Yeah, it's huge, right? Because sometimes faith can feel like a solo sport, but it's not meant to be. We
Right.
need people to lift us up when we stumble, to remind us of the truth when we start to doubt.
And the devotional points out that even Mary had Elizabeth, her cousin, to lean on. They shared their journeys, their doubts, their hopes. It's like they were each other's cheerleaders, reminding each other of God's faithfulness even when things felt uncertain.
Which is kind of a relief, honestly, because it means we're not expected to have it all figured out, to be these stoic pillars of faith all the time. We're allowed to be messy, to question, to lean on each other.
Yeah, it's about embracing the journey, not just the destination. Because it's in those messy, uncertain moments, that's where faith really takes root, where it grows into something powerful.
Okay, so we're talking about prayer, studying the Bible finding community. What else does the devotional highlight about putting faith into action, especially when things feel impossible?
Well, this might sound a little unexpected, but the devotional talks about the power of choosing joy. And not just happiness, which can be fleeting, but a deeper sense of joy that comes from knowing God is with us, even in the difficult times.
That's interesting, because it's easy to think that faith means being serious all the time. But maybe there's room for joy, even laughter, in the midst of it all. Maybe it's okay to find moments of lightness, even when life feels heavy.
Exactly. And the devotional points out that Mary's song, the Magnificat, is full of joy, even though she's facing some pretty daunting circumstances. It's like she's choosing to focus on the goodness of God, on the hope that's coming, even when the present is tough.
And maybe that's part of what gives her the strength to keep going right. It's not about ignoring the hard stuff, but about choosing to let joy fuel her faith, to remind her that God is bigger than her circumstances.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that faith isn't just about gritting our teeth and bearing it. It's about finding those moments of joy, those glimmers of hope that sustain us along the way.
Okay, so we've got prayer, study, community, and even choosing joy. It's starting to feel like a toolkit for navigating the impossible, wouldn't you say?
I think so. And the devotional emphasizes that these aren't just one-time actions, but practices we can weave into our daily lives. It's about creating a rhythm of faith that sustains us, even when we face challenges that feel insurmountable.
Yeah, it's about building those muscles of faith, so to speak, so that when we hit those merry moments, we're asked to trust God in the face of the unknown, we're ready.
Exactly. And those moments, as the devotional reminds us, are often the ones that shape us the most, that lead to the greatest growth and transformation in our lives.
Yeah. It's like Mary's story isn't just about her. It's about us, about finding the courage to say yes to God even when it feels impossible.
And that's where it gets really exciting, because the devotional ends with this beautiful invitation to imagine our own Mary moments. Those situations where we're called to step out in faith and trust God's plan even when we can't see the whole picture.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, what are some of the key takeaways from the devotional that we can carry with us as we reflect on our own journeys of faith?
Well, I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is that the devotional doesn't shy away from the messiness of faith. It acknowledges that it's not always about mountaintop experiences and easy answers.
Right, it's real life. And it reminds us that faith often involves wrestling with doubt, facing uncertainty, and making difficult choices.
Yeah.
When we don't have all the pieces.
Yeah, and yet it's in those messy, uncertain moments that we see the true power of Mary's faith. She didn't let fear paralyze her, and she didn't pretend to have it all figured out. She leaned into her trust in God, even when it felt risky.
And that's so powerful.
It is, and the devotional really emphasizes that that's where the real transformation happens. It's not about achieving some kind of perfect faith, but about allowing our faith to be tested and refined through those challenges.
Right, which is encouraging, honestly, because it means that our struggles, our doubts, those aren't signs of weakness. They're actually opportunities for growth, for deepening our trust in God.
Totally, and the devotional reminds us that God isn't afraid of our questions, our doubts, our struggles. In fact, he often uses those very things to draw us closer to him.
Yeah, it's not about pretending to have it all together. It's about being honest with God and with ourselves about where we're at.
Yeah.
And then
refusing to trust him anyway. That's the heart of it. That choice, that surrender, is what allows God to work in and through us, even when we don't fully understand what he's doing.
It's amazing. And, the devotional encourages us to remember that we're not alone in this. We have the example of Mary, this ordinary young woman who faced extraordinary circumstances with extraordinary faith.
Right, and we have each other. The devotional highlights the importance of community, of surrounding ourselves with people who can encourage us and support us, and remind us of God's faithfulness when we're tempted to give up.
Yeah, because let's face it, having faith isn't always easy. There will be times when we feel overwhelmed, discouraged, even tempted to walk away. But knowing that we're not alone, that we have people to lean on, can make all the difference.
It really can. And the devotional reminds us that even Mary had her moments of doubt and questioning, but she found strength in her relationship with God, in the support of her community, and in the hope that fueled her faith.
And ultimately, that's what this whole deep dive boils down to, isn't it? It's about finding that hope, that unwavering belief that God is good, that he has a plan for us.
Yeah.
And that he's with us every step of the way, even when the path ahead seems impossible.
It is. It's about choosing to trust, to surrender, to step out in faith, even when it feels scary, knowing that God is bigger than our circumstances, bigger than our fears, and that he's able to do immeasurably more than we could ever ask or imagine.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into faith in unlikely places, I want to leave you with this challenge. What impossible situation are you facing right now? What seems too big, too overwhelming, too daunting to even consider tackling?
Yeah, take a moment to really sit with that question. What dreams have you put on hold because they feel out of reach? What fears are holding you back from taking that next step? Where has doubt crept in and whispered, what if?
Because maybe, just maybe, that's where your Mary moment is waiting. That's where you're being invited to step out in faith, to trust God's plan even when you can't see the whole picture.
You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have perfect faith. You just need to be willing to take that first step, to say yes to God and let him lead the way.
Because in those moments of surrender, of trusting in the unseen, that's where the real miracles happen. That's where faith truly comes alive.
And who knows? Your story of faith, your act of courage, might just be the inspiration someone else needs to take their own leap of faith.
So go out there, embrace the impossible, and watch what God can do.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more fascinating explorations, more unexpected connections, and more insights to fuel your curiosity. Until then, keep seeking, keep questioning, keep diving deep.